Thank you for the opportunity to engage and share views. And let me also commend the Society for Corporate Governance for helping the country, especially the business community, to help us to stay in the straight and the narrow and behave correctly. Now, your question is what I understand, as corporate governance. I think corporate governance, simply put, is correct behavior in line with rules and regulations that may have been agreed or subscribed to by a group of people. And that behavior can be from an individual or from corporates. Ultimately, anyway, it's individuals that run corporates. So in my very simplistic approach, I think it's daily living by rules that you've subscribed to. You are part of creating the rules, that you will submit yourself to those rules, and is living by those rules. Now, those rules are not, they can change. Again, the people that make the rules, given that life is dynamic and the operating environment is changing, and we're part of a global world, it's not impossible that those rules can be updated, and the people that are subscribed to those rules, again, will make up their minds that they will continue to live by those rules. That is what eventually, I think, leads to an orderly society. It's an orderly society, not just human society, but I'm talking about it in terms of even corporate. Because where there is no order, then an alternative may be anarchy, maybe people behaving as they like. I think it's been work in progress. So if you ask the same question a few years ago, you compare to today, you see that there's progress. So I think that to the extent that we're having conversations, we're subscribing to global rules. Some of the operators are members of companies that operate elsewhere, so they can take the learnings, or they are supervised by regulators outside the country. So they invariably they are under stricter rules sometimes. So over the last, let's say, 10 years, you can see that things have moved along. At the time that some banks, where we had the distress or the challenge in industry, specifically it would be around 2009, on the back of the global financial crisis. Even the regulators here stood up to the plate and took over some banks. And we understand, it's clear hindsight now, that some of the challenges that operators had were as a result of violation of corporate governance rules. And learning from that experience, we have then come along the line where you can say we're getting to maturity. We have learned a few lessons. We're applying those lessons as an industry, and the industry is better governed today. I think there are a number of players. First, there's the regulator, because people take the operators basically follow or are guided by the regulators. So there are codes or guidelines that are published, released from time to time by the regulators. Of course, the primary code is given you when you are licensed, so you know the things to do, what not to do. But even after licensing, to ensure that in daily operations, people stay within the rules, their guidelines. And like I mentioned earlier, because life is dynamic, those guidelines will change from time to time. So one group or one set will be regulators. And in banking, the primary regulator is the Central Bank of Nigeria, but there are other regulators depending on what business that institution carries out. If you're listed on the stock exchange, in some sense, you're under the purview of the Nigerian Stock Exchange. You're under the purview of the Securities and Exchange Commission. If you have within your stable, say, a pension business, then you're regulated by the National Pension Commission. If you have an insurance business, you're regulated by the Insurance Commission. So there are many regulators that we have to in quote contend with. That's number one. Secondly, and arguably, internally the most important group would be the board. I think ultimately the board has the responsibility to govern and lead the company, and below the board is the management of the company. Yeah, so those are the various levels of people that are dictating the pace and the tune. I think so, and sometimes if you are outside, you may not be able. It's difficult to tell the rigor that and the scrutiny that banking institutions go through. The amount of inspections that we have to go through, whether it's for foreign currency, whether it's the normal annual inspection. Sometimes they carry out what they call joint inspection. They would be here with the Deposit Insurance Corporation. Sometimes they will be here with the other regulators. So to the extent that they've given us the code, what they are trying to do with those inspections is to ensure that we're living by those codes. So I would think that in the banking industry, the central bank is leading. But obviously we can always get better. And that's what I meant by work in progress. Life itself is work in progress. You never arrive at a point where you think you're already done. But by the time you arrive at that point, you're ready to go to heaven. So you always get better, and I believe the regulators also try to do that. The regulators are not in a vacuum. So the regulators cooperate. Central Bank of Nigeria, for instance. So we are members of Standard Bank Group. Our primary regulator as a group is in South Africa. It is the South African Reserve Bank. Both regulators are cooperating. So there may be things happening in that space. The central bank here is informed. So they're cooperating and sharing experiences. But it's not obvious outside. It's not. And once in a year, I think, or every now and then, they have what they call a conference. It's a gathering where the two regulators would have a meeting. And if it's hosted by the South African regulator, they will invite other regulators. So what happens is that the representatives of the central bank here will be there, and they meet all the other governors or regulators, and they're exchanging ideas. So they get better all the time. Yeah. Oh yes. If you are a holding company of structure, you are aware Stanbic IBTC Holdings Plc, we're a group of 12 companies, and we operate in various markets. I think I alluded to that earlier. We're in insurance, we're in asset management, we're in pension management, we're in trusteeship, we're in banking. So we're regulated by therefore many people. So those conflicts arise all the time. And our rule is to adopt the strictest of the codes. So if you take the two prominent codes that you have been supporting and promoting, it will be the national code of the FRC and maybe the central bank code. Sometimes there are obvious conflicts. Let me give you one or two examples. So in terms of the tenure of the independent directors, for instance, in the national code, I believe it's 9 years. And in the central bank, I believe for independent directors is 8 years. We would like to let them stay for 9 years, because if somebody, before you choose a director, you go through a rigorous process. So you like to have them for as long as possible. But in that example, the stricter code is the central bank code. So you let the director off after 8 years. A second example would be the constitution, or what you call the nominations committee or the selection committee. That's the committee of the board that chooses new directors. I think that in the national code, the chief executive couldn't be a member of that committee. The central bank allows you to be a member. So again, applying the stricter one, you will say, okay, the chief executive can be in attendance. He may not be a member of that committee, depending on how you interpret it. So those are obvious conflict or examples of conflict that I can see between the different regulators. It's a culture. So you remember where we started from when you asked me what corporate governance is. So once you have, it's a bit like in a family. You know, a family, a man, a woman, their children. They have a meeting that this is how we will conduct ourselves in this family. The expectation is that everybody, daddy, mommy, will. Sometimes daddy and mommy try to cheat because they are daddy and mommy. The responsibility of the children is to say, no, but daddy, we don't do that here. And they come under pressure. So that kind of behavior then becomes a culture. So daddy and mommy have no choice but to subsume themselves under that. The day or if they willfully, consistently violate it, because their children will soon follow. That's the culture that you see. So the point I'm trying to make is that it's a culture and we subscribe to it because we were part of any aspect of the code that we had an issue. We gave comments and the most popular opinions prevailed. Even if we don't like some sections, we have to live by them in the hope that someday anyway it may become obvious that those sections will be better written. So we have to stay engaged and ensure that we're contributing. So that's our disposition at Stanbic IBTC. So it is therefore has become a culture. And we believe that codes are supposed to, we say the same thing to regulators when they come here. Instead of seeing them as, headmasters or people trying to punish us, we see them as partners that are helping us get better. Our disposition to codes is the same. The codes are supposed to help us get better if we live by them. Therefore, we don't apologize or we have no issues subscribing or submitting ourselves to stricter codes. The only hope that we have is that the codes are consistently applied and every member of the community try to abide by the code. So the challenge comes when some members don't abide by the code and there are no sanctions or no reprimand, or there's nobody, maybe sanctions is a strong word, there's nobody telling them, like you live on an estate, saying, Chief, you are out of yes, can we obey the code? Yeah. I think it is relevant because not every company is necessarily as regulated as a financial services company or a bank, and therefore they might not be facing the same rigor or the same discipline. What a national code does is to create like a level playing field that applies to every company, including those that are not being regulated as closely as a banking institution. So I think that's a benefit. But we must then decide that though there's this national code and there are other codes, the companies, I think the national code does not directly say it is compulsory, but you find that it becomes indirectly compulsory because if, like Stanbic, your attitude is that you will live by the stricter. It means you've subsumed or submitted yourself to some rules. So I think the important thing is that people or companies in the various sectors, if they can take the same attitude, that we would, though some things are not compulsory, but we will look for the strictest or the most demanding that helps us to succeed and be sustainable as a company, and we abide by them. Then the economy, the business environment gets better. The country gets better ultimately. Yeah. There are myriad of challenges. But management teams and boards are called to deal with challenges. So, the better we deal with them, the stronger we get as corporates, as corporations. Some of the challenges, let me mention them. There will be challenges that you can call macro. They're in the environment, they're environmental, and they may come from politics, they may come from how the country is led, they may come from regulations, So those are macro challenges. Outside macro challenges, you have challenges that are specific to institutions, so you can call those ones business challenges. So there may be challenges of how do you find, the right people for the right roles, for instance, because you're in an environment where you're competing with other institutions, and the people that win ultimately will win by largely from who they assemble to go into that battle for them. They'll be like two football teams playing. The team that prevails invariably will prevail based on the players and their coach, the tactics that the coach tells them. And those tactics will be different for different matches. So it's very dynamic and complex. But like I said, we're happy that we have those challenges and we can navigate them. But your real question is, how do we use corporate governance to surmount those challenges? Again, because there are many players, when the battle is fiercest or is fierce, human beings try to let me use it loosely, cheat. I'm using it loosely. You're going to look for alternatives. You're going to look for ways, because it's about survival. Now, what keeps everybody in check is that there are rules. If there are no rules, anything goes. No, but why do people need to be in check? Because being in check and obeying a set of rules is what sustainably, over a long period of time, will sustain a society. If the society is about people looking for shortcuts, breaking rules, that society will not grow sustainably. They will not experience progress in a sustained manner. So corporate governance helps us navigate challenges, and by helping us, the rules, corporate governance helps us to be sustainable. It helps us to be sustainable. It helps us to be 30 years, 40 years, 50 years after we are gone, because there are rules that people that are running the company, the corporation, are following. Then they will be fine. Yeah. No, I wouldn't say so. And perhaps the reason people say so is they expect that there will be no corporate failures. If you have all these rules and you have supposedly people are complying or are trying to abide by corporate governance. But I think that's such a simplistic interpretation or approach. The fact that there are rules, or if there are no rules, perhaps what they're describing will be more severe. There will be anarchy. So I believe that I don't think that is overflogged, is the point I'm making. And I believe that because those rules exist is why we're even here. If they don't exist, then perhaps companies will be failing at a faster rate. And those that are not that are not abiding by the rules will get away with all kinds of things. So you create an unlevel playing field. I believe that I think I used the term before, is work in progress. I don't think that we can get to a stage where we will now say we don't need governance again, or we don't need direction. I think we always need direction, we always need rules. What we must do is to be conscious to revise those rules to make them relevant as the business environment changes. So let me use an example. Banking, the first time I came, has changed dramatically. or not even the first time I came, all of us as young, middle-aged people, there was a time that you had to go to a bank to complete a transaction. Now, do you know that you may not have to go to you can go through a month, a year, and you don't have to go to a bank. I know people that have not written checks in like 3 years. That thing that you write, that paper. I have colleagues here that have not used it for years. So you have to then be sure that the rules become relevant to this new world. It has to be dynamic to acknowledge that the things that we did 10 years ago are not done today. What are the rules that are required to be sure that we can continue with an industry that grows? I think that is the challenge of governance. Yeah. Okay, let me give one more example. When I came to the bank, or there was a time that you could have the chairman as the MD of the company. Why did they change the rule? Because the human beings were not at the level of maturity to combine both roles, where the chairman was the MD. He was overriding everything. So they will go to board meetings. He was the chairman anyway. He's the MD. So everything went through. So companies were failing. But you know there's still parts of the world that they have that in the US. So, but in Nigeria, it was relevant to separate the two, to strengthen the industry. That's an example of making rules relevant. They're very important. Everything flows from the board. The board is the principal governing organ of a corporate. But I also have to accept that the effectiveness of a board sometimes depends on the members understanding their role. Number one. Number two, if they don't understand their role, it also depends on the people running the business, management, allowing them. So it begins from the selection of selecting credible, independent board members that will say their mind, that would hold the management and the company accountable to living by the rules of corporate governance and the rules of the country. If you miss that step, you may be at risk of the board becoming a stooge of management. Or if the management is not open-minded enough to accept other opinions, then the board may not be effective. I think for those that are only under that national code, so for a bank it's easier, or for Stanbic it's easier. I've already told you that we would come under the stricter rule. Therefore, I see it as compulsory anyway. But for those that are not, this is the only code that they are under. I think some elements have to be mandatory. They have to comply with some elements. Elements of things like you have even in company law, that the company should have at least two directors. I think those are basic things that a corporate has to comply with. So I think those sections need to be compulsory. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Great question. You know, we have many stakeholders that we're attending to. It could be as many as 5 or 6. You have the regulators. You have the company's employees. You have the customers. You have the staff. You have the community. So a leader of a company, a leader of a company, of a bank, is trying to balance, how to satisfy all those stakeholders. In my view, the code help him Because ultimately, if one person gets restive, you can show them the code. That I'm unable to do some things because we live by some rules. So the first thing that I think a leader must do is to subscribe to the code. They should engage and participate in creating the code. Once the code is pronounced, they should then put their money where their mouth is. They should live by the code. I think that is very significant to virtually all the stakeholders. Take the staff, for instance. You're right that the MD leads, people that work here. If the staff know that our company, as represented by the MD, would do the right thing in line with what it has subscribed to. Let's say there was no code at all. That code will be the constitution of the country. Or let's say we have a branch in this Victoria Island local government, and the MD says we're going to live by the rules of this community, ladies and gentlemen. It means, for instance, that the staff cannot drive against traffic. If they do, they will be severely sanctioned. It's so basic, but it's the same thing that is applicable in a code. So I think a very important role of the leader is to say, come rain, high water, sunshine, I will live by the code. Gentlemen, this is our culture. But does that mean we're perfect? No. What I'm saying is that we're not going to go out to deliberately, willfully be flouting rules of our industry or the constitution of our country. I think every leader must do that, not only in corporate, every leader, whether in politics, whether they are leading their families. That's where I think human institutions, survival and sustenance of human institutions, I think that's the core of the society. So we have to live by those codes. And when we are wrong, we put up our hands and say, we are wrong, we're sorry. We will do it better next time.